we will have the privilege to listen to Professor Alexandre Loktionov, where he will discuss the Egyptian culture and the role the coffins played in it. And you will be surprised, I promise you. But before we begin, I would like to say thank you to some very special people. First of all, the director of the museum, Maria Jose. She's over there. Without her dedication, energy, passion, this would not be possible. Absolutely. So thank you. Thank you. And Senia. Thank you, Senia. Senia is an amazing person. She is an art curator. She's dedicated, focused, and has an extensive networking gallery. She's the one who introduced us to all these wonderful artists, painters, piano players, Egyptologists. Without her, this would not be possible. So thank you, Senia. Thank you. And last but not least, the most important person to me, my partner, Lola Dominguez. She's not here, she lives in Malaga. She's an artist, and she is really the heart, the soul, and the true positive force behind our company, Arboleto and Friends. She tries every day to give something positive to this world. Something. Painting, music, stories, compositions. Something that could lighten up this world. So, thank you, Lola. Thank you. And the seminar itself, the seminar will be 60 minutes, followed up by a 30-minute question and answer session. And after that, you will be served wine and snacks to mingle, ask questions to us, the professor, and just mingle and enjoy it and have fun, definitely. And as you may have noticed, this seminar is completely held in English. So what we are doing is we are recording it, and then we'll post on the net with Spanish subtitles. So everyone can be part of it, definitely. And without any further ado, I give the word to Senia. So thank you all again for coming, and thank you all again for making this possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus, and especially for these kind words, unexpected. Buenas tardes, señoras, señores y amigos. Good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome this evening a distinguished Egyptologist in our cultural city of Santa Pola, Alexandre Loktionov. Alexander is a professor at the High School of Economics in Moscow in Egyptology, and also he is a bi-fellow at Christ College and Lucy Cavendish College at the University of Cambridge. He's also a visiting senior fellow at the Department of Political Science at the King's College London, and he's also affiliated scholar of MacDonald Institute for Archaeological Research in Cambridge, a fellow at the Royal Academy of Arts, and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. His main research interests lie in the ancient Egyptian justice and exchange of cultural, intellectual exchange between ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and also history of Egyptology. He holds PhD and MPhil and BA from the University of Cambridge. and has previously held visiting posts at the Library of Congress, Sichuan University, and the University of Bologna. But in addition to all this long list of academic regalia, he also a wonderful person, a caring son, and a very loyal friend. So now please welcome Alexandre Loktionov.
All right. Well, I hope this isn't the point at which I disappoint you all with some sort of embarrassing technological failure, which often happens in the world of Egyptology, but I shall try not to. Anyway, I am here standing in front of you all today to talk about coffins. And I am incredibly touched that you have chosen to be here listening to this rather morbid topic, as opposed to being outside in the fresh air and doing happy things. But what I will be trying to illustrate to us today is that the world of Egyptian coffins is a lot more colorful, it's a lot more vivacious, full of life, than what people have maybe imagined. So I'd just like to begin by flashing up some key themes, some key topics that we're going to be covering. The first one that I want to address is why study Egyptian coffins? I mean, of all things, why is this worthy of study? I want to introduce the Fitzwilliam Museum Ancient Egyptian Coffins project. So this is one of the major projects on which I'm currently working. And then I really want to delve deeper into this dichotomy, this contrast between uses of Egyptian coffins in the afterlife and uses of Egyptian coffins in life. Why would you want to use a coffin as a living person? This is a very different idea to what we're used to. And we're also going to be talking about the materiality of coffins. How are these things made? How are they disassembled? How can they be resold? How can people go to court over a coffin? Now, I imagine nobody in this room has ever been to court over a coffin. If anybody has, I would be surprised and a little bit concerned. But this is what people did. So we'll think about why. So the first question that I want us to answer is this one. Why study Egyptian coffins? Now, the first point is basic. Well, there's an extremely rich evidence base. There are a lot of coffins. So if we have coffins, why not study them? Ancient Egyptian culture, as we know, is heavily tilted towards the funerary realm. Material is better preserved if it's far out in the desert where people were being buried, as opposed to on the banks of the Nile where there was flooding. So we have a lot of coffins and we can study them. The second point is, of course, that they come with great artistic and cultural value. So if we think of ancient Egypt, okay, we may think pyramid, or, Egyptian cat, or whatever. But we also think of sarcophagi, we think of coffins, we think of the funerary realm as symbolic of Egypt. And it brings with it an artistic and a cultural value as a sort of ambassador for what that culture is about for people today. It's a source of national pride. But at the same time, we have got to challenge the simplistic narrative about Egyptians being so obsessed with death as to not care about anything else. That's not how it was, and it's not what the coffins were about either. And all of this is happening right now, I think, for no coincidence. This year has seen a big development in Egyptology, with the opening of the largest Egyptology museum in the world, the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, which is also the largest museum of any kind on the entire continent of Africa, and one of the largest museums in the world. So Egyptology is coming into very sharp focus, and I think that's the perfect time to give it a coffin boost. All right, I have too much technology in my hands, but I'll keep going. So the Fitzwilliam Museum Coffins project, I've divided into two main subsections, if you like. So we have our research themes. This is what we're actually trying to learn, trying to discover. We're developing a new interdisciplinary framework for coffin studies. So that is both looking at coffins as what I term a resurrection machine, a bit like a car can take you to your destination, so a coffin can take you to the afterlife. So there's a lot of religious studies, a lot of theology involved in that line of research. But we're also looking at them as manufactured items and as valuable objects which can be bought and sold, reused, stolen, or litigated over. And then we have our outreach outputs. There's a major exhibition currently happening at the University of Cambridge at the Fitzwilliam, led by my colleague Helen Strudwick, and the proceedings of the International Coffin Conference, of which I am the lead editor. So this will eventually lead to this book, the proceedings of the International Coffin Conference, which will offer the latest insights into Egyptian coffin research. And this is actually the first public venue where I am talking about this book. Obviously, we have the contract signed. This book is very much on the cards, and it will feature 35 chapters from top scholars from Egypt, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Russia, Spain, Britain, and the US. Published with a top publisher, Archaeopress from Oxford, and based on Cambridge output. Now, this is, if you like, a development of a previous book, which I am very keen to show people if they are interested. This is something that we've already got published, and in fact I have a copy right over there by the piano in my bag. Now, rather embarrassingly, I have not taken the bag with me up on the stage, and I don't want to root around in it right now. So if people are interested, then you can look at this book at the end of the talk. I'm very willing to show it to you. But this book hopefully gives an indication of the sort of publishing output that we are hoping to achieve. 17 chapters on topics related to our previous project, which was on ancient Egyptian justice, questions of law enforcement, and what the Egyptians considered fair. And this is a book that, if you so wish, you can purchase for the princely sum of £48 on the Archaeopress website, or alternatively at major bookshops in Britain and around the world. Okay, so that's the previous book. Now, let's talk about resurrection machines. So this is the best known feature of Egyptological coffin studies. As I've already pointed out, a coffin is a vehicle to travel into the afterlife. And it is therefore essential for that coffin to be preserved, which is very different to how most modern day religions operate. So if you think now about coffins in Christianity, let's say, which is obviously the religion many of us would be most familiar with in this audience, you bury somebody in a coffin, and that coffin will decay in maybe 10 or 20 years, it will stop existing. Or alternatively, you cremate someone and you burn their ashes and the coffin is burned. Either way, within a relatively short period after death, the coffin no longer exists. And that is because in the Christian tradition, it doesn't really matter what kind of coffin you're buried in. the philosophy, the theology, is grounded in other concepts that are independent of the coffin. And a Christian believer can happily go to heaven in a very basic kind of coffin, or even in no coffin at all. That's not the point. But in the Egyptian religious tradition, the coffin was a source of physical protection for the body and a source of spiritual protection for the body too, serving as a medium for spells and divine imagery. That means that the coffin needed to be preserved forever, just as the body did. We know about the body because everyone's heard of mummification, right? Egyptian mummies, they were very famous. But the coffins are a part of that setup too. And the more coffin decoration, and indeed the more coffins somebody has, the better the chance of a good afterlife, because on every coffin you can add spells, you can add imagery, you can add all sorts of material culture to increase the chances of that person going into the afterlife. And you put coffins one inside another, a bit like Russian dolls, you know, with a big stone sarcophagus as the outer receptacle. So, one fun thing that you can do in our field is you can read a coffin in much the same way as you can read a book. So here is our friend Nes Pawe Shafit, a nobleman from about 1000 BC. So this is his coffin lid, inner lid, about 3000 years old. And there are a set of what we call registers on it, a set of distinct scenes. So I can add in these lines to show how we can divide up the coffin into these different scenes. And each of these scenes is very tightly codified. It's got very specific meaning that both Egyptologists today and priests, scholars in the ancient world would have been able to understand. Now, we're going to be here a long time if I decode every single image for you right now, so I'm just going to give us a snapshot of how this works. If we look at the second scene, we have a boat, and that boat contains in it in the center Amun-Ra, the sun god. He's got the sun disk on his head, and he is traveling over the firmament, he's traveling over the sky in his boat with his two guards, front and back, and in front of him he's got the scarab beetle. Now, some of us may have come across the scarab as a symbol of ancient Egypt. That's because the scarab beetle rolls the ball of dung across the ground, and in so doing resembles the sun being rolled across the firmament from dawn to dusk. So, in particular, the rising sun comes to be associated with the scarab, and that is why the scarab is at the head of Amun-Ra. And the reason you have all of this on the coffin is because the deceased person is to rise again like Amun-Ra himself. And then I'll give you one more scene. Here's the goddess Nut, the sky goddess, right under the boat of Ra, because he is, of course, traveling over the sky, so she's beneath him. And she is depicted as a beautiful, fertile, nude lady, upheld by the god of air, standing on the earth, and with male and female spirits on either side. And this is an image, of course, evocative of fertility, rebirth, the idea that in the afterlife, energetic forces of existence are going to kick in once again, and life will be eternal. There will be a new start, there will be new vitality, new vivacity coming out. So the coffin and the coffin imagery is actually not sad. It's really quite happy, it's quite uplifting. There's all this stuff going on here. And I'm very happy to go through the other scenes on that initial set of images later on for anybody who may be interested. We can do that in the Q&A. But for now, I'm going to carry on this whirlwind tour of the coffin. by talking a bit about the coffin texts. So, as well as the imagery, you have protective spells designed to help the body achieve reanimation in the afterlife, which are written on the inner coffin walls. Now, this is something which originally in the Old Kingdom you get in the pyramids. Now, it's not much fun going inside the pyramids, I can tell you. The tunnels are very narrow. You have to go on all fours. This is a problem, not least because to an ancient Egyptian, this would have been completely inaccessible. The pyramid was a purely royal burial space. The move towards coffin texts after the pyramids, about 500 years after, about 4,000 years ago, was a sea change. It was a transformation in Egyptian religion that saw the understanding of what awaits us in the afterlife opened up to a far larger audience, to far more people. Now, the text which was previously written on the wall of the pyramid just for the pharaoh became available to anyone who could afford a coffin. You can buy a coffin, you write in the text, and you are as good as Pharaoh. You have your own path to the afterlife. Interestingly as well, these coffin texts serve as the precursors for arguably the most famous work of ancient Egyptian literature, which is, of course, the Book of the Dead. And what we see in the Book of the Dead is already partly visible in simpler form in these coffin texts. And here is probably the most famous scene of the Book of the Dead. Now, the next slide, I'm sorry, is not a very exciting slide, but no Egyptology lecture, I think, would be complete without a quote from the Book of the Dead. So here it goes. Thus says Thoth, judge of truth. Thoth, judge of truth. Here he is. Ibis-headed. And what does he say? To the great Ennead in the presence of Osiris. The Ennead are the judges. They carry out divine judgment on behalf of Osiris. Here they are. Those are the judges, and that's Osiris himself. What are they doing? Hear this word of very truth. I have judged the heart of the deceased, and his soul stands as a witness to him. This is the heart of the deceased. This is what stands as witness to the doings of the dead person in the afterlife, well, in the previous life, and ultimately at the entry point to the afterlife. His deeds are righteous in the great balance, and no sin has been found in him. He did not diminish the offerings in the temples. He did not destroy what had been made. He did not go about with deceitful speech while he was on earth. Here is the great balance. That is the weighing scene. All right. Thus says the great Ennead to Thoth in Hermopolis. So that's those guys again. There they are. They're responding to Thoth. And what are they saying? This utterance of yours is true. The vindicated Osiris, followed by the name of the dead person, is straightforward. So the dead person, through the process of mummification, through the process of being interred in the coffin, has merged with Osiris. The dead person has actually become part of Osiris. He has no sin. There is no accusation against him before us. Amit shall not be permitted to have power over him. And you definitely don't want Amit to have power over you, because Amit is this beastie. 1/3 crocodile, 1/3 lion, and with the backside of a hippopotamus. Not much fun. Let there be given to him the offerings which are issued in the presence of Osiris, and may a grant of land be established in the field of offerings. In other words, may the dead person be provisioned to live forever. So that is the central piece, the key message of the entire Book of the Dead. Through being well prepared, through having the right spells, through having the right mummification and the right coffin, you will secure your eternal life. You will be judged and found not to be heavier than the feather of truth. So you got to get this right. You got to get your coffin right. Whether it is because of the coffin text on the inner surface or because of the Book of the Dead that might be placed inside the coffin. So if something is meant to last for eternity, well, in that case it should be well made. So another part of the coffins project, this actually is not the part that I work on, but I still believe it's very interesting, is the one that focuses on what materials were used, on the materiality of these coffins. Where were these materials sourced from? Who were the craftsmen making the coffins? Who are the people, the living, breathing people behind these, these vehicles to the afterlife? What tools were these people using? How were they being paid? All of these practicalities in the coffin economy. And I think what's very exciting, although some of this goes over my head because I'm not in any way a laboratory scientist, is that we are increasingly using modern, highly technological laboratory methods to study these coffins and to yield new insights into the scenes, the imagery, the texts that are found on these often quite damaged and quite darkened surfaces. So, for instance, we can use reflectance transformation imaging, commonly known as digital epigraphy, to yield image C, this, from image A. So these are all things that we're going to be publishing in the upcoming book, where you will get to see all of these coffins in high resolution for the first time ever. So we will be the first people looking at these scenes really since the ancient Egyptians did so several millennia ago. And we can see that thanks to the digital epigraphy, we've been able to bring to life once more the boat of the sun god, for example, the procession of the sun god and the other gods as they proceed through the night sky. So we're using these cutting-edge laboratory methods, scientific methods, to bring more of our data set into relief. We're also using a lot of microscopy, a lot of laboratory analysis of the biological material of which these coffins are made. So these are more photos from the upcoming book, from Abdel Manim's really, I think, incredibly forward-thinking publication that uses microscopy techniques to show how wood and beeswax are possible to deploy in the dating practice of a coffin. So we can look at these materials to understand how old the coffin is, and also where the coffin comes from. So you get different types of beeswax, different types of wood in different parts of Egypt, or even beyond the borders of Egypt. So we can start building up the biography of these coffins. These coffins are international objects, some of them. The building materials for them have come from afar. They are assembled as a result of a real team effort of different importers, different suppliers. All of this is now coming into view. And none of this, of course, would be possible without the close collaboration that we have with partners in Egypt. And I want to say a huge thank you to Noor Badr, Mohammed Abdelmanim, and the rest of the team at the Grand Egyptian Museum in Giza, to the Ministry of Antiquities as well, for everything that they have done over the past 3 years now in bringing the Coffins project to where it currently is. As we can see, this is a large endeavor, and I think a very important example of the sort of international work that we need to be doing more of. Of course, my thoughts are very much with these people in the current climate in the Middle East as well, and we all passionately hope that Egypt is not affected by any of the tragic events that are happening in that part of the world. Of course, on a happier note, we've also seen in these last few months the opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum, which has been occurring alongside our work on the coffins. And some of the coffins that we are talking about today are, for the very first time, going on display as part of the GEM, the Grand Egyptian Museum, opening its doors. What, however, of the craftsmen, the craftspeople who made these incredible works of art, who made these coffins? The insight into their lives comes from a number of sources, but I think one of the most interesting is the Satire of the Trades. Now, the Satire of the Trades is a papyrus just over 3,000 years old, which is designed to promote the lifestyle of a scribe. Essentially, the lifestyle of a bureaucrat who sits there with his pen and only does writing and does not do craft. His view of what it was like to produce coffins was not very flattering. The implication being that it's very, very hard work. I see the coppersmith at his toil, at the mouth of his furnace, his fingers like crocodile skin, his stench worse than fish eggs. The jeweler drills in bead making, using all of the hardest stones. When he has completed his inlays, his arms are destroyed by exhaustion. So the Satire of the Trades, this sort of official bureaucratic account of what it's like to be engaged in high-order craftsmanship, suggests that manufacturing, be it inlaid coffins or the amulets and jewelry that can go on these items, is incredibly painful, back-breaking work. But that only tells part of the story, because of course that's the perspective of the scribe, who doesn't particularly want to attract people into the artisan profession of coffin making. He is a representative of his own profession, that of the scribes. Instead, I think we have to look at the administrative documents, which provide a more honest assessment as to the value of coffins and coffin making in ancient Egyptian society. These sorts of administrative texts are devoid of an agenda. These are not the heavily ideologized scribal texts, which are dishing the dirt on the craftsman, essentially, because that's what scribes do. These are administrative documents which are simply denoting the cost. Transactional documents, the equivalent of ancient Egyptian receipts or bank statements, if you like. Now, to understand this, we need to know a little bit about the deben. So you will see here on the screen these deben, these measures. Now, the deben is the Egyptian equivalent of currency. This is a society that doesn't have coin. They haven't got money in the way that we do, and instead they engage in standardized barter. What this means is that any object, whether it's a coffin, a set of weights, scrap metal, or an animal, is assigned a certain equivalent in deben. So notionally, one deben is worth about 90 grams of copper. But you don't actually need to pay it out in copper. Instead, you tend to make transactions of the sort that we see on the screen. So a coffin is worth 25.5 deben. So let's work out how much that is to the average Egyptian by assigning deben measures to various other objects that would have been important to them. We can see, for example, that scrap metal, bronze, a valuable metal, worth 8.5 and a further 5 deben of bronze, that much, plus a small goat of 2 deben, a larger goat of 3 deben, 2 wooden logs of 2 deben, and even a pig of 5 deben. All of this, all these wonderful things, were what you would need to give up to get one of these. So that's your equivalent of a Rolls-Royce, a top-of-the-range car. Because this is a lot of wealth. I think it still is a lot of wealth now. Come on, 2 goats and a pig. Who doesn't want that? Complete with all the metal and the wood, the building materials. This is a good deal. But the picture that we're getting is that these coffins are very, very expensive items, and producing them brings with it money. Now, of course, where there's money, there's conflict. There always is. There might be crime, and there is, and there might be legal cases, and there are. So, a few years back, I was part of a team that published Ostracon OI 12073 from Chicago, which we have on board here. Now, this concerns a jar of fat, worth 30 deben, and it gets loaned out. But the loan then goes wrong, because the person to whom the loan was made does not repay it at all. And eventually, when he does, he makes an overpayment. Because, as I say, the Egyptians haven't got currency, they haven't got coin. All they've got is these bartered goods. And all this man has to repay is a bull. Massive bull, worth 130 deben. So what then happens is he has now overpaid by 100 deben, because the original jar of fat was worth 30, he's repaid 130, he wants 100 back. Now, the person from whom he is claiming the 100 deben back says, I'll give you a coffin. You're going to want a coffin, aren't you? Coffin is valuable, I'll give you this coffin. But then they have a dispute, because the coffin is only valued at 35 deben rather than 100, and 65 deben are left outstanding, and the matter goes to court, and it becomes very, very complicated. So a jar of fat leads to a coffin, that leads to a court case, that leads to all sorts of chaos. This gives us an idea of how Egyptian justice operates. By the way, jar of fat, why jar of fat? Well, I just thought I would put this in, because in ancient Egypt, you wear cones of pig fat on your head, if you're a beautiful young lady. The pig fat stores in it perfume. It's perfumed pig fat. It's kept cold, you put it on your head, and the perfume will drip down your body, and it will beautify you, it will moisten your skin, you will smell very nice. Now, if you're in ancient Egypt, you're presumably wearing a skimpy outfit, or maybe no outfit at all, and this will work quite well. If you live in a slightly cooler climate, like the United Kingdom, which is where I live, then it's not such a good idea. So don't do this at home. Or maybe if you live in Santa Pola, then this is, in the summer, it's fine. Up to you. Anyway, pig fat. Now, yes. Okay, well, welcome to the world of Egyptology. This computer has done what every single computer does, and it has garbled and mangled my transliteration script. But that's okay. That's okay, because that happens in most places. And of course, what I should have done is converted the script to a PDF, and then that would not have happened. But no matter, we'll read the translation instead, and it's all going to be fine. So this is from a court case where some thieves have been caught robbing a royal tomb, a pyramid. Now you can imagine how serious this is. The pharaoh is a god. In fact, the son of the sun. If you destroy a pyramid, if you destroy a royal burial, from a theological perspective, you are imperiling the prospect of the sun rising in the morning. So this is an extremely severe crime. These people are obviously put on trial, and they are tortured, and a confession is extracted out of them. And the confession is the following. We opened their sarcophagi, the jaba'u, and their coffins, the wet, they being inside them. We found this blessed mummy of this king, he being provided with scimitar, there being plentiful number of amulets and adornments of gold upon his throat, while his headgear of gold was upon him, while the blessed mummy of this king was encased in gold entirely, while his coffins wet were covered in gold and silver, on the inside and on the outside, in every noble stone, while we collected, which we found on this blessed mummy of this god, together with his amulets and adornments being on his neck, and the coffins, the wet, while he was resting. We found the queen exactly likewise. We collected everything that we found upon her in like manner, and we set fire to their coffins. Of course, as is always the case, the most exciting line of text has been cut off by the computer. That happens. Good thing I have at least a garbled transliteration in front of me so I can read it from the Egyptian. So there are a few different words for coffins, and I can see at this point the computer's been going all over the place, and it's been moving hieroglyphs around the screen, and it's all become very chaotic. But I think this is still worth highlighting. There's a generic term for coffin, wet. There's a term men'anch, referring to an outer coffin, an inner coffin or suchet, and finally the stone sarcophagus or the jebat. So just think about this. A single culture has 4 distinct words for coffin. We just say coffin. They've got 4 terms. That shows you the level of importance of these things. They're litigating over them, and they are describing them in all sorts of terms. Now, in the last few minutes of the talk, because I am conscious of time, I just want to introduce you to the latest research on this, the research I have been doing in the last few months or so. And I've just provided the data set here in case anybody is incredibly Egyptologically minded. There is a wonderful book, Hieratische Ostraka und Papiere aus der Remissidenzeit, by Shafiq Alam from 1973, which serves as the core legal data set for what I have been doing. This is the publication of Egyptian legal texts of the New Kingdom. In his own words, a selection of hieratic texts from the Ramesside period aims to create a useful and reliable basis before starting the legal discussion. So what I have been doing is working through that corpus of texts to identify what proportion of Egyptian, specifically New Kingdom Egyptian legal texts mention coffins. And the results, I think, are quite interesting. So I've broadly divided the legal texts into two types: litigatory and non-litigatory legal texts. So by litigatory legal text, I mean a legal text which actually describes or discusses in some way court process. There is some manner of dispute happening. Somebody is being sued, a will is being disputed, there's a prosecution, a defense, whatever. These are the litigatory texts. They tend to be maybe more exciting for most people. But the majority of legal texts are in fact non-litigatory. These are texts of legal import, of legal significance, but there is no dispute. So this might, for example, be a property transaction. It might be a will. It might be a marriage contract, bill of sale, any of these things. So these documents have legal value, but nothing is actively being disputed. What I'm interested in is tracking down, do coffins appear in the legal texts at all? And if they do, what contexts do they appear in? Are they being litigated over, or are they sort of being mentioned as part of contracts or whatever the case may be? And these are my results. So out of a corpus of 284 legal texts, well, 248, so 87%, don't mention coffins. But I think quite incredibly, over 12% do. So certainly in the New Kingdom, more than 1 in 10 legal texts was about coffins or mentioned coffins. I mean, can you imagine that in our society? Imagine lawyers spending maybe 10% of their time dealing with coffin business. Now, on top of that, some 2% of these documents, so we're looking at 1 in 50, are of a litigatory nature. So that means that people are fighting over coffins. People are actually litigating, they're pressing charges over these coffins. In a further 10% of cases, they're not doing that, but they are creating contracts out of coffins, they are signing legal agreements involving coffins, presumably because they are concerned that there may be coffin-related litigation happening down the line. So coffins are a hot topic. And this is a slightly more technical slide, but for those of us who like our vocabulary, we see our terms again: the wet, the generic coffin, the suchet in a coffin, the jebat, stone sarcophagus, and menanch, outer coffin. So from that we can see that all 4 of these types are listed in the legal documents. The Egyptians are litigating over all of them. Especially, they like the generic term wet. That's the most common term used in the legal texts. And it's used 34 times. So it's not a rare word. And I thought it would be interesting to just list on the screen the attestations. There are a lot of attestations here, and if you're interested, come up to me later. I'm very happy to share the slides. We can talk about this more. Again, I note that a bit of text has been cut off at the bottom, but there are 2 that I particularly want to mention. So these are cases where the coffins appear to be primary to the case. In other words, they're not part of legal proceedings alongside other things. They're what the legal proceedings are about. So the legal proceedings are occurring specifically because of the coffin. Cairo 25242 is an address to an oracle a divine oracle, asking the god to confirm how much work on a coffin and its wood is worth. So there has been a disagreement as to the value associated with a tradesman putting in some work on a coffin. The contractor wants to be paid. The person who has ordered the work does not wish to pay up, and there's a dispute. And in another case, there's a legal dispute about the exchange of a coffin for a room. So there is a widow involved, and this widow wants a coffin. And she is prepared to offer her dead husband's room in exchange. I suppose there's a logic to that. The husband no longer needs a room, he needs a coffin. She doesn't want to pay for the coffin, she says, have the room. But the craftsman who is making the coffin thinks this isn't a very good deal, and he takes her to court. We don't know who won. But I think this gives us a flavor of the sorts of cases that are in action. So this is a bit more on Cairo 25242, complaint of the workman Hayam Waset to King Amenhotep. King Amenhotep is by this point deified. He is a god, saying, "Come to me, my lord, go past me. The commission which I carried out for the workman Kenna, son of Ruta, is a piece of outer coffin, and it belongs to me as wood. This is my outer coffin." And the god nodded, saying, "It's good for 15 dirham. Your outer coffin is worth" how many pigs? 3 pigs. So, victory. And this is the case with the widow, DEM 225. The workman, in a minute, with the citizeness E, the wife of I, who is dead. Literally, who is extended. It's an interesting way of saying someone is dead. She said, "I'm commissioning a coffin for my husband, and I want you to bury him." So she spoke. She said to the scribe Ibn Nacht, "Make a coffin for I, and you may take for yourself his room." So she spoke. She said to the scribe Ibn Nacht, "Give the coffin." The rest is tantalizingly broken, but we know this is a legal text because it is found in a judicial archive. So something then goes wrong. They end up litigating. Then there's this case, Papyrus Deir al-Medina 26. This case is very dark. This case gets nasty. She said, "False. I didn't take it." Then Suwa spoke to me. Anchnacht took it. Nechemut, my father, to take the coffin of Nechemut, Nechet and Wabet. They were made to take the oath of the ruler, so this is the standard oath, saying that we won't talk, they being under 100 blows and 5 wounds. So there's torture involved here. The 2 district officials were instructed to do something. You should arrest him and put him in stocks for fixing the feet. And he said, he took the shield of Nefeshenet, my father. And the 2 scrolls were laid down before the god. He said, the children of Nefeshenet did love something regarding the garden, and they performed the oath of the ruler. So that coffin in line 1, to take the coffin of Nechememut, something happens, presumably the coffin goes missing, maybe it gets stolen, maybe it gets sold, but as a result of it, someone gets beaten up, possibly even to death. Someone else gets put in the stocks. There are scrolls that are being set up, that are being put before the god. This is an inquiry of the highest level, all because of a coffin. So as I say, it's actually part of a much larger papyrus. This is how we know it's explicitly judicial in nature, because it's part of a list of 5 cases which are written out as examples of particularly serious legal cases that were occurring in Deir al-Medina at this time. Deir al-Medina, that's a village in Egypt that happens to have a very good archive that we can use for our studies. So this takes me to my concluding comments, because I realize that my hour's almost up. So beyond the famous tomb robbery cases, the cases of the pyramid of the king being robbed, beyond that, mentions of coffins in day-to-day legal documents are maybe not all that common by Egyptian standards, but they do occur with a frequency of 13%, which by our standards is pretty remarkable. It's usually in non-litigatory settings, 29 out of 36 attestations, but there are cases of people litigating exclusively over coffins, and I hope we've been able to demonstrate that today. So with that, all that is left is for me to thank you for your attention. I hope it hasn't been an overly grave topic.